Welcome to the IVM Podcast Network.
The Paodcast is an IVM production, and if you enjoy listening to our show, you should definitely check out IVM Likes by the Indusbox Media staff. It's your weekly dose of pop culture recommendations, whether it's books, movies, or TV shows.
You're listening to the Paodcast, presented by the Daily Pao.
This is Pranuti,
Amit,
and Purva, and we're from the dailypao.com, a Bombay-specific food and culture website, and this is our weekly podcast, The Paodcast. Now, this episode is the 75th special episode, and we're doing an Ask Me Anything special in which we'll be answering questions from listeners of our podcast. So stay tuned.
Long, long ago, not in Bethlehem, but in a place nearby, there was a wonderful birth of a huge show, which I like to call Cyrus Says. A show that encapsulates everything in human history, from the first Homo sapien to the last Homo sapien, who's traversed the entire world and then come back to India. This is a show which tells you everything about everything. If you want to know, avoid Google, come to us. It's called Cyrus Says. Get new episodes every Monday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts on. You get one banana vada free with every podcast. Right. I'll just check that.
So this is the 75th episode of the podcast, and we set the podcast in unison after a very long time.
That was especially for Chuck Gopalakrishnan, who you might know as the host of Simplified, and he sent in a question asking why we don't do the podcast. We don't say the podcast in unison anymore. Well, Chuck, the reason is, I'll simplify it for you, is that earlier we used to have slightly different format. We used to have 3 segments, and then we changed it to just having 1 segment. So 3 segments, 3 voices, 1 segment, 1 voice. Okay, I just made that up.
We made that up. It just sounded super lame, so we stopped.
But Chuck did send in another couple of questions.
The real reason is we just got tired of saying it in unison. We thought it felt forced.
And also the fact that it was never actually in unison.
Yeah.
But anyway, Chuck actually did ask another couple of questions, one of which was about where you get the best food from each state in India. Now, that is far too big a question, and it's really an episode idea, or an idea for an article we can do on our site. He also wanted to know where you get authentic Northeast cuisine and food from Uttarakhand. So we actually...
Well, for Northeast, I'm going to take over this question. Northeast is pretty simple. There's Gitika's Paghor, which is
Assamese specifically.
Yeah, Assamese. So Gitika Saikia is a home cook, and she's been running this pop-up for a couple of years now, and she hosts them very frequently. So you can always sign up for one of those. She has them in different restaurants and different food venues. The spread is pretty lavish, and a lot of them are celebrating like seasons, harvests, New Year, stuff like that. So the meals are always fantastic, and you could also request her to book a private meal. I'm sure she's, if you have a group of 4 or 3, she's able to cater a meal, and she does this out of her Juhu home if it's for a private catering. So that's for Assamese food. And if you want Uttarakhand, actually it's a timely question, because there's a fairly new a food service called Meraki Bombay, and we had the co-founder Pooja on our show a couple of weeks ago, and she also does pop-ups in the city. They're not as regular as Gitika's Paghor, but if you follow them on their Instagram page, you'll get an idea of when they're hosting their next pop-up, and that's a good way to try.
And also her co-founder does food from Meghalaya, right?
Yeah, you're right. Her name is Tai, and she does food from the Khasi Hills.
There are 2 other places actually that do Northeast food. Now, they're not particularly good. Purva, you and I have been to King Chili.
Right, in Kuala.
Not in
Kalina.
Kalina,
my bad, yes. Kalina.
So this is in the main Kalina market, and there are 2 outposts of King Chili on the same road, and it's primarily a Chinese restaurant, but they do have a few dishes that are Manipuri. And Kalina has a very large Northeast population, so I suppose it's to cater to them. And I remember we had a chicken salad, which was pretty good. It was flavored, it was very spicy and was flavored with king chili. Yeah, bhut jolokia.
Which is what we went there for, actually, in search of the bhut jolokia.
Then we had a potato mash, which was also quite tasty because it had some fermented stuff in it.
Yeah.
But the thing that both of us found it a bit hard to stomach was in fact buff stomach. It was like a vat of entrails, which I think if you're not used to that kind of texture, it'll be hard. There's also Seven Springs in Vashi. It's a small restaurant that has an assortment of dishes from all over the Northeast, and it's called Seven Springs because it represents the Seven Sisters. But it's okay. It's not fantastic.
Yeah, but it's authentic.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's authentic or not. I'm sure the stuff that you get at Gitika Saikya's places is far better.
Chuck's other question is, and we're allowing him 2 questions because he is a regular listener, is that he wants to know whether there are any accessible forts in Bombay. And there are actually plenty of forts in the city, and they're all accessible, but they're not exactly, they're more like tourist attractions and places of interest rather than things that you can go and trek to, right?
Yeah, I mean, these are not forts you can trek to because they're in the city. If you want to trek to forts, then you'll have to go to, Raigad and places around Maharashtra. But the forts that you can visit in the city are the Worli Fort, which has quite a spectacular view of the sea and the sea link.
Yeah, which is through Worli Koliwada.
Exactly. Then there's the Shivri Fort, then the best time to go there is in the winter when you can spot, it's a vantage point for seeing flamingos. Then the Bandra Fort,
which many of us have probably been to. If you've been to a concert at the Land's End Amphitheatre, you've been to Bandra Fort. You just have to climb up and see the ruins.
Great spot for photographs.
And also canoodling couples.
Exactly. So if you want to canoodle
or
Chuck,
run,
it's the place to go. Then there's the Vasai Fort. I haven't been to this fort. I've only seen photographs, and it's quite a photogenic place.
It looks
it's
I think a lot of film shoots take place
I've been to it. When we were in Xavier's, I took up a photography course, and it's quite lovely. It's lush and great for photographers.
Isn't that the one where they shot that Coldplay video, Him for the Weekend?
I think it was.
And they shot actually both inside Worli Koliwada and at Vasai Fort.
That's right. Yeah. There's also the fort at Mad. It's a small fort, and you can visit it you can take the ferry from Warsaw, get off at Mad and check out this fort. There's a fort at Mahim. This is not particularly accessible as there's a lot of encroachment around it. And finally, there's a tiny piece of the original Bombay Fort wall, which exists in St. George Hospital near VT. And that's the oldest piece of a fort in Bombay.
After which fort has been named.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving on, we have other questions, many other questions to go through. One of which is from a reader called Manas, who wants to know, where in Bombay do you get good pie? He's been looking for a place that serves pies in Bombay for ages, but he says almost every place serves only apple pie. Now, is there a place that serves a variety of pies? Well, there is, and we have written about it. And Purva, you've tried them, right? There's Mama Z's.
Yeah, so Mama Z's is basically, it's a home-based caterer in Cuff Parade, and she makes fantastic, my favorite, they do sweet and savory pies, and my favorite is the brie and caramelized onion pie. It's super cheesy, it's pretty heavy, but it's delicious, you won't be able to stop at a slice. They do a great banoffee pie that's just as rich, and my favorite is their chocolate and caramel pie, which they also serve in a jar, but she also makes it in a pie form. They've also added asparagus pie, bacon and cheese pie, and walnut pie too.
I mean, this is since we wrote about them.
Yeah, to their selection, and they're available on Skootsi, so it's pretty easy to order across the city. In addition to Mama Z's, there's also Hina Punwani, who does who goes by the name Tiffin Tales, and she's a dessert caterer primarily, and if you've tried desserts at the Bombay Canteen, she's recently been she's contributed there as well. But if you call Hina, she's able to do. She does a fantastic strawberry balsamic pie. It is seasonal, but she does other seasonal fruit pies as well. Her apple caramel. I know you're done with apple, but her apple caramel pie is fantastic. It's one of the best in the city, and. She also does a great caramelized onion and cheese pie. So both at savory and sweet, Hina's fantastic. In fact, I suggested to her, she had a little pie gathering, and I suggested to her that she should get into a pie service full time, because the city really does lack good pie makers. And what you find on menus are, the more common apple pie and shepherd's pie. So there you go. You have two great options now.
Cool. Then Deepika, a listener, wants to know, where do I get fun party things from? Now, she says not the high-end expensive party shops, and I don't know what she's referring to, because there are a couple of party shop chains. There's one called Party Hunters, which is in Bandra and Colaba, and there's another one called Madcaps that's in Pedder Road, Matunga, Bandra and Dheri, and they all do a whole variety of props and wigs and whatever different theme kind of things, and they're not that expensive. So I don't know whether you're referring to that, Deepika, but if you're looking for really something economical, a good spot to go to is good spots to go to are Crawford Market and Something Special, which is a shop on Hill Road, and they've got everything from streamers, balloons, caps, hairbands, glasses. They have photo booth props, and they all sort of start really cheap. So those two places are, I think good spots to go to. Next up, we have a question from Mandar, who wants to know about the black pav bhaji, which is served only in Bombay. Now, I have to be honest, I have tried the fancy version of this, but not the original, which is served in a place called Maruti Pav Bhaji in Ville Parle, and they've been around since the 1970s.
Yeah, so I haven't tried this either, but my research says that it gets its color because they use a special homemade masala that has lesser of the red color, the red chili, and it's more pepper heavy. So it's more pungent than regular pav bhaji, and it has a darker color, but I just think that it's a marketing thing and not necessarily the color is not necessarily a selling point sounds.
Clearly the word got around about how famous this place is because Masala Bar serves their own version of the black pav bhaji, and they call it a carbon pav bhaji, which in both the bread and the mash, they're both made black by using edible carbon dust. Now, I've actually eaten this when I went to review it, and the whole place is so dark. I don't see the point of having a black pav bhaji, because you can't see it. All the food looks black because it's only lit by candles.
Yeah.
But anyway, this was not bad, but it was just not as buttery as a regular pav bhaji. So it really wasn't, I have to say that.
This whole black in food, it's pretty trendy, and you have squid ink pasta, and what Masala Bar is doing sounds a bit more legit in terms of the color, but I just think it's not a reflection on taste. Yeah. So,
And we got two pav bhaji questions actually. I don't know, maybe because we're the daily pav, but Sanil wants to know the best pav bhaji centers in Bombay. Well, I guess everybody has their own favorite.
Yeah, so mine, Sardar and Tardev is pretty good, but...
Because you just like butter, because that's the secret to their pav bhaji, is basically they put a small slab of Amul butter in every pav bhaji.
But butter is good for you. Butter is the secret to all good pav bhaji, guys. So you know what? Just let's drop this whole pav bhaji without butter. It's not pav bhaji without butter.
Well, I think that's what Sardar's pav bhaji is 50% butter, 50% bhaji.
It is a bit obscene, but it's delicious. Then there's also Amar Juice Center in Ville Parle, which is super famous.
Yeah.
For its pav bhaji, it's a good balance. It's not as buttery as Sardar's.
It's also a chapati.
Yes.
And speaking of chapati, there are two favorites. There's Shiv Sagar, there's Sukh Sagar, which are both very popular for their pav bhaji, and I know that they're kind of obvious places to mention, but
they're consistent. In the Bandra Shiv Sagar, I only order pav bhaji from them, even though I have other options here, and they do a great masala pav as well, which is essentially a dry form of pav bhaji where the pav has absorbed like, the spices and the gravy, so to speak. It's in the pav, and it's also as buttery, but it's tasty. It's like it's a spicier version of pav bhaji and the drier version.
But I think the unsung hero in the pav bhaji steaks is Maji Sagar, which is also in Tardev. In fact, it's a short walk from Sardar, and their pav bhaji is terrific. It's really buttery, but I don't know, I suppose the butter has melted by the time it reaches you, because it doesn't look like a heart attack on a plate. And it's fantastic, especially for people who don't like to eat very spicy food. So they do a great pav bhaji that's not very spicy. And it's the best pav bhaji I've had in the city.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, one tip while eating at Sardar is to look away when they are putting in
the butter.
that slab of butter, because you may not be able to.
Speaking of spice, on the other spectrum, very spicy apparently, and this is Roshni Bajaj Sanghvi's recommendation. She, of course, writes the food column on the Daily Pav. She recommends a masala pav at Manohar Pav Bhaji, which is in Girgaon, opposite St. Teresa's Church. Now, Roshni says that the masala pav at this place is on the spicier side. It's also very buttery, and what they do is that they actually put the pav, which is soaked in butter, and they tear it up and they put it into chunks and they put it into the pav bhaji itself. And I guess that gives it its own sort of unique taste. In Manohar Pav Bhaji, apparently the whole menu is like pretty much only pav bhaji. So they're another specialist. And, I also just wanted to mention that pav bhaji has sort of become like now something that you start experimenting with, right? Because you've got like all these fancy versions, not just in masala bar. There's also pav bhaji fondue.
Yeah, which is great. It's essentially pav bhaji in a fondue pot, so it's boiling when they serve it.
Instead of like you just take the pav in like tiny little squares and dip it in.
The Spice Club in Lower Parel, which I actually really like this. So purists, I'm saying sorry beforehand.
Because I think it's just a presentation style. Actually, the pav bhaji is identical to what you'd have otherwise.
It is,
right?
but they serve the pav as like croutons.
Exactly,
almost.
and then you like fondue. Like
you
just
skewer
them and dip them.
And I don't think you can talk about purists when it comes to pav bhaji,
exactly.
because it's
more
such
sort
a
of
mishmash of it.
It is mishmash. That's what it is.
You can always offend people when it comes to food, so I always put a disclaimer.
And 145 does pav bhaji cones.
Which is basically pav bhaji stuffed in a bready cone.
Exactly. So it's basically just different styles of presentation. And sticking with food, Bhavesh wants to know where do you get good steak?
Bhavesh, we have searched long and hard for this answer ourselves, and the answer that we have come to is that you do not get good steak in Bombay. So give up that dream. The best steak in Bombay is either in Dubai or Bangkok, which are the closest flights to great steak, closest destinations rather to great steak.
Pranav wants to know where in Bombay is a haunted attraction, a place that is basically a horror house kind of theme, and or a horror movie with a VR experience. He's looking for anything to sort of scare his guts.
Go to Andheri bars. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go to Andheri bars, but if that's not scary enough, then there is, we could only find one place, and it's at Smash, which is a gaming center in Lower Parel.
With 3 A's.
Yeah, with 3
A's. You're Googling it.
Smash. And they have something called the 9D Extreme Interactive Theatre.
So not 4D.
Yeah,
not
but
3D,
9D.
not 4D,
Jesus,
but 4D, but 9D.
They really want to scare you, these guys.
Yeah. So now this interactive theatre, this is what it involves. Goosebumps on a roller coaster, chills of a haunted house, and the thrills of an interactive shooting gallery, and you get to do target practice on zombies.
Okay.
So
we got to do this as a team. Thanks for asking this question, Pranav.
Yeah,
I didn't know it existed.
So if you want to get some thrills, I think Smash is the only place that you can go to. I remember SL World used to have a haunted house that moved, but I don't think they have that anymore.
Yeah, I think he's looking for something a little more high end. He wants to do a VR experience.
Let's not recommend SL World in itself is a pretty scary experience.
Yeah. So Smash is your best bet.
Okay. Finally, we have a couple of questions from Ayush.
Who's a super fan.
Yeah, and he is actually he's a journalist and he's contributed to our site. And speaking of horror stories, he has plenty of horror stories from Delhi, where he did this guide to themed restaurants in Punjabi Bagh. So, Pranav, if you want to know where I have a similar experience to Andheri bars in Delhi, you can check out Ayush's guide to Punjabi Bagh. Now, the first of his questions is he wants to know a pen portrait of a Daily Pav reader. Now, I don't know exactly what he means by that, but I checked the analytics and I'll sort of tell you some demographics about what the Daily Pav reader, the average Daily Pav reader is like. Well, most likely to be female. 65% of our readership is actually female, and to be between the ages of 25 to 34, which is the bulk of our readership, over 40%. And they're interested in things like entertainment, travel, food, and film, which I guess is kind of obvious, but since you asked. The other question that he asked was, what's the weirdest, nicest, funniest, and saddest thing that listeners have said in response to the podcast? Well, one of the saddest things I think is that a lot of people tell us, hey, I listen to your podcast, I really love it, but I don't read your site. So it's kind of weird.
Yeah. But so this makes us happy and sad at the same time, because people are listening to the podcast but not necessarily reading the site.
But there are nice comments
there are
as well.
Actually some
there's
nice
somebody from London wrote to us, and he said that he is a regular listener and our podcast reminds him of Bombay, and it's his chai time routine to tune into our podcast every week, once a week.
Every day would be weird.
And he actually sent us a really cute doodle of Daily Power scribble, and I think there was like a cup and a saucer dedicated to our podcast, and that was really sweet, and I know he still listens. And a lot of people, sort of send us comments about specific episodes, so we also know that they're regular in that sense, because they'll recall an episode from a long time ago, and we'll have to jog our memory, thinking, okay, when did we do this? One that I keep getting comments for is the Pan episode. In fact, people have told me that they've actually gone on their own little Pan trail after they heard that episode, or that they felt the courage to go and try Pan, which is great, because I'm happy to be spreading the love for Pan.
So that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed our answers, and we'll be back next week. For more on what's happening in the city, read thedailypao.com. Also subscribe to our newsletter on the website. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're The Daily Pao. You can find new episodes of the podcast every Monday on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you prefer, and on thedailypao.com.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Sorry to say, but there's been a slight delay due to the apocalypse having suddenly begun. As you can see, there's death, destruction, and chaos taking place all around us. But don't you worry, food and drinks will be served shortly, and I would recommend checking out
IVM Podcasts
to get some of your favorite Indian podcasts. We'll keep you going till this whole thing blows over. Thank you.